6%. This has dragged overall inflation rates to 35%, a 10-year high for a country that had been achieving double-digit growth for much of the past decade. This report, of course, shows an incomplete image of the crisis in Ethiopia, but gives us a short glimpse of the national crisis waiting to unfold. For more, Fanny Olumuro.
On January 24, 2022, the Ethiopian Central Statistical Agency issued its bi-monthly consumer price index, reporting that food inflation had reached 41.6%. The spike in food costs is mainly due to a surge in the prices of vegetables, meat, milk, cheese, eggs, and spices. The ongoing conflict had a major impact on the spike of goods due to the disruption of farming activities and the supply chain. Reports indicate that inflation rate has been steadily increasing since the start of the conflict in November of 2020. The total annual inflation rate has now reached 35%, according to the Central Statistical Agency of Ethiopia, its highest in over 10 years. For over 2 decades, Ethiopia had been showing promising economic progress, recording double digits for well over a decade. In October 2021, however, the International Monetary Fund withheld its prediction on Ethiopia's economic growth on its annual World Economic Outlook, stating the country's volatile circumstances. This has put Ethiopia alongside countries such as Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria. The ongoing conflict in Tigray has devastated Tigray's economy with the deliberate destruction of public infrastructure, the discontinuation of all public services, including banking services, and a complete communication blackout.
Since the war on Tigray broke out, the humanitarian situation has been at its worst state, leaving millions in dire humanitarian situation. Getachew Reda, member of Central Command and spokesperson for the national government, said on Monday that 27 trucks carrying much-needed aid were stranded in Afar region after they were turned back by Afar regional forces, while the central government had pledged to permit the trucks to enter Tigray through Samrab Ala humanitarian corridor, which has been the only viable route into Tigray for much of the conflict. The Afar regional government had refused the 8 trucks permission to travel into the region. It is to be recalled that no aid-carrying trucks have entered Tigray since December 14, 2021, as the humanitarian catastrophe in Tigray continues to intensify. Many assume that the Nobel Peace Prize is awarded to individuals that started a meaningful process towards peace. But in an interview with CNN's Zen Asher, chair of the Nobel Committee, Brett Races Anderson, says that the committee also factors in other considerations like maintaining the award's relevance. Our reporter Salome Tigrai says that there could be dangerous outcomes to a prestigious award given too hastily.
For decades, critics have raised questions about who deserves the Nobel Peace Prize and for what deed. Alfred Nobel, the founder of the award, had stated that the prize should be awarded to the person who shall have done the most for fraternity between nations, for the abolition or reduction of standing armies, and for the holding and promotion of peace congress. But Berit Reiss-Andersen, chair of the Nobel Committee, describes a different set of criteria for awarding the Nobel Peace Prize, specifically the interest of the Nobel Committee to remain relevant.
This is a question often placed to the Nobel Committee: have we given prizes too soon? I would like to reverse that question. If we were always sure of the outcome of a peace effort, the Nobel Peace Prize wouldn't have been as relevant as it in fact has been through 120 years.
The Nobel Committee, jumping the gun and awarding individuals that were yet to establish a meaningful process towards peace, has led to absurd outcomes, like an award to Kim Dae-jung for his efforts to reunite the divided Korean nations. But in countries like Ethiopia, the Nobel Committee's attempts at remaining relevant have had a dangerous outcome. Experts and international media, quoting former members of Abiy Ahmed's administration, have said the award emboldened Abiy Ahmed, who felt he had international mandate to lead as he pleased. But the Nobel Committee, while releasing a statement, that Abiy Ahmed has a special responsibility to initiate a process for peace, the chair of the committee has continued to stand by its decisions, saying it could not have foreseen the future.
The committee stands behind the decision made in 2019 of rewarding the Peace Prize to Prime Minister Abiy, and on the basis, on the picture you painted so efficiently in your introduction. Since then, the situation has changed. There is a war in Ethiopia, and the Nobel laureate is very unprecedented participant in that war as a prime minister. And that is very unfortunate that the Peace Prize laureate is participating in a war, but we could not foresee this situation.
But for those that had cared to listen, Abiy Ahmed's so-called attempts at bringing peace were always questionable. Not only was the peace agreement unclear and efforts at normalization completely non-existent, but had already appeared to be empowering Isaias Afwerki, a man almost solely responsible for the decay of a promising East African nation. Eritrean activist Benassa Tsahaye would publish an article in the days following Abiy Ahmed's award, emphasizing that the peace deal had had very little impact on the ordinary life of Eritreans and Ethiopians. Borders remained closed, and indefinite national services had continued to be the norm in Eritrea. But even today, after an ethnic cleansing campaign that has displaced over 1.2 million Tigrayans from Western Tigray, the complete destruction of Tigray's health system, the established use of rape and famine as a weapon of war, the chair of the Nobel Committee continues to refer to the conflict in Tigray as complicated and refuses to accept the horrific toll the Ethiopian government's war tactics have had on civilian Tigrayans.
And I would also like to underline that the situation in Ethiopia is very complex and complicated.
While there is no statue for revoking the prize, Kjetil Trombo, professor of peace and conflict at Jokens University, a university in Norway home to the Nobel Committee, says that members can take individual responsibility for awarding the 2019 prize to Abiy Ahmed by collectively resigning their honorable positions in protest and defiance.
Hundreds of thousands of people who have been displaced from Qafta Humara district are in serious need of humanitarian assistance due to the siege on Tigray. As the situation continued to worsen due to the siege, food and medical supplies have been depleted, leaving IDPs in a dire situation. Our reporter Haile Gebru has more on this.
There are currently over 2.2 million internally displaced people across Tigray, with over 1 million of them displaced from Western Tigray. Since the war in Tigray broke out, millions of people have been displaced, leaving all their belongings behind, and thousands have been killed in the process. Ever since their home was invaded by the Ethiopian forces, everything they have ever owned was either looted or destroyed. A large number of internally displaced people from Qafta Humara district are now sheltered in the town of Abiy Adi, the central zone of Tigray. However, now, these IDPs have run out of basics due to the siege.
The siege imposed on Tigray has become deadly. There are over 300,000 internally displaced people here. However, we couldn't get any access to humanitarian aid for about 7 months now. Pregnant mothers, children, and the elderly among the IDPs are now starving to death. There is a drastic increase in the number of people who get sick on a daily basis. We are in a big trouble.
We're starving to death. There is no mat on which we can sleep here. We simply used to lay on the ground because we have no other option. We have nowhere to go. People's lives are at the verge of death. The government of Ethiopia is using hunger as a weapon of war.
Thousands of IDPs are suffering from hunger. We are in a horrible situation. Besides the hunger, contagious disease are spreading every day. There are no sanitary facilities and materials. If it continues this way, this toll will rise alarmingly.
We are leading a terrible life following the all-encompassing siege in Tigray. I am a pregnant mother. We have no one to support us and attend our unbearable everyday challenges. We don't have enough clothes. People are dying due to lack of medicine and hunger. Children are at the brink of death due to malnutrition.
Abiy Ahmed's government has been committing heinous crimes over the people of Tigray for over 13 months now. Millions of Tigrayans are now starving to death due to the siege. Medical stocks have been exhausted, leaving patients destined to die. Meanwhile, the IDPs from Kafta Hamura district have asked the international community to put an end to the torments being committed by the Ethiopian government and its allies and lift the siege as soon as possible.
So we have pleaded the international community to listen to our calls. We have not been responded for quite a while now. We have been deprived of humanitarian access by Abiy Ahmed's government. Many have started falling like leaves in autumn because of hunger and lack of medication. Unless we get emergency food assistance now, we will all die sooner than later.
We need the attention of the international community. What have these people done? These people are poor and peace-loving citizens. We're dying of starvation. We're being exposed to different diseases due to lack of clothing. Thus, the international community must open its eyes and see the calamity that had befallen on Tigray.
The internally displaced people from Kafta Hamura district further announced that Abiy Ahmed's government and his allies are using all the packages within the framework of genocide to exterminate Tigrayans from the face of the earth. Moreover, they have also stated their demands for life-saving food assistance and medical supplies as soon as possible.
This weekend, Eider Comprehensive Specialist Hospital announced that more than 250 babies have been born with congenital anomalies, birth defect, while more than 60 pregnancies had been aborted. Lacks of basic health services and maternal malnutrition during pregnancy have eroded the hard-won gains in improving child and maternal health in Tigray. The hospital added that lack of basic health services and inadequate nutrition during pregnancy have contributed to abnormalities during birth and may have a major impact on the health and well-being of a generation of Tigrayans. For more, Abraha Gabertinsay has this report.
Eider Comprehensive Specialized Hospital announced that there has been more than 250 defective births or congenital anomalies, and more than 60 pregnancies have been terminated through abortion. Dr. Froin Tesfai, an assistant professor at the gynecological unit at Eider Hospital, says child and maternal deaths has skyrocketed due to the absence of basic medical care and inadequate nutrition for pregnant women. According to Dr. Froini, the hospital's health professionals are busy writing death certificates of children and mothers.
It hurts a lot to write death certificates. It's a horrible experience for us all. Counting deaths of innocent children and their mothers creates irreversible psychological trauma on health professionals. Being unable to control child and maternal mortality has put us all in an agonizing experience, since most part of our job has become writing death certificates.
According to Dr. Froini, child and maternal mortality has recently skyrocketed, and the few mothers who survived it have been diagnosed with fistula and related illnesses because they were forced to deliver at home for numbers of reasons related to the siege.
Underweight birth and birth defects of both physical and developmental have become common in our hospital. There are hundreds of children who are born underweight or with congenital anomalies. Mothers do not come to hospital on time, and they no longer get antenatal care service. This has caused them to be vulnerable to fistula, a complication that had almost been eradicated from Tigray, but has now gained a momentum.
Dr. Froini added that Eider Hospital has run out of basic medical equipment, including gloves, gauze, and bandage, and the hospital is forced to use women's scarves and other garments to carry out delivery operations and as sanitary materials. To make things worse, mothers are undergoing surgery during birth without anesthesia drugs, and doctors are using scarves and other rags for delivering mothers as there are no basic materials in the hospital anymore.
We go door to door asking women to donate the scarves they wore. It's a heartbreaking predicament. I don't know what to say. There is nothing worse than having to witness a mother delivering with her own scarf instead of the gauze that doctors normally use throughout the procedure. I'm usually bewildered for what scene these poor mothers and children are being punished for. It hurts a lot to inform mothers that antenatal service is inaccessible due to shortage of basic medical equipment in the hospital.
Eider Comprehensive Specialized Hospital, the only tertiary hospital in Tigray, had been the most important health institution in providing efficient child and maternal health care services for all the people of Tigray and neighboring regions. However, the ongoing conflict and the subsequent blockade of humanitarian supplies have seriously affected the medical service it provided.
An investigative report by Globe and Mail earlier this week had brought to light atrocities committed by Somali forces in Tigray. The report was able to confirm that Somalian troops in Eritrean uniform had killed clergymen and destroyed and looted private property. Our reporter Aragaw Mikel had a look at the involvement of Somalia troops in Tigray and its implication on Horn politics. Let's take a look.
For much of the war, the presence of Eritrean forces was disputed by Ethiopian authorities despite ample evidence of their presence and countless numbers of atrocities they had committed on the civilians. But later on, the presence of yet another Horn of African nation in the conflict would baffle the world. Reporters from international outlets in March would confirm the participation of Somalian troops in the conflict in Tigray. The Somali troops were apparently misled about where they were headed. Trained in Eritrea by Eritrean authorities and forcibly taken to Tigray, where they were used as cannon fodders for Eritrean troops advancing into Tigray. Security expert in the Horn of Africa, Abdusalam Guled, a former Somalian intelligence chief, says that 10,000 Somalian troops were illegally deployed to Eritrea.
I was the first person who alerted this in January last year. And I was getting a report from Eritrea and Ethiopian officials who were in the front line informing the Somalis' involvement in the Tigray war. But the Somali government denied it again and again. And it was this 10,000 Somalis were unknown to anyone, and they are not missing from anyone. We have tried to talk to Somali military, Somali police, intelligence, government, and all those counts says they are not missing anyone. But it comes to the clear after the pressure and pressure, family demonstrated, yes, there are a number of Somali troops missing, and they were all illegally deployed to Eritrea in the name of training.
The severity of the situation was later brought to light when in June of 2021, family members of the deployed soldiers protested in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, asking to know the whereabouts of their children. Abdusalam Gule says he later learned that many of the soldiers who had been smuggled into Eritrea without proper documentation had actually been killed.
They were killed, and I've been told by the Eritreans, by the Ethiopians, they were killed. Some parents, they told me that children managed to speak to them and they informed them of friends and family who've been taken with them along, being killed in a war in Tigray. The great number of Somali soldiers who were smuggled to Eritrea without any proper documentation, yes, they were killed.
According to Abdusalam Guled, the tripartite agreement between Eritrea, Ethiopia and Somalia had always been about building up the country's military capacity.
There was something called tripartite agreement between the three countries, Eritrea, Somalia, and Ethiopia. And they were trying to have a standby force, equal number from each country, 30,000, the report says. And this could be the reason why they've been deployed to Eritrea unknowingly and secretly, without any proper documentation as well.
According to Nausanai Belai, a political analyst, the three dictatorial regimes considered the people of Tigray as a natural block towards their dictatorial ambitions.
The three regimes in Somalia, Farmaajo or Abiy, doesn't depend on the political or economic capability of their own to function as a state. And unfortunately, this guy's dependence, this dictator's dependence on the war technology from foreign powers, finances, they are depending not for development reasons. They depend on the foreign capital, foreign technology, and foreign military and political advice to kill their own people, to crush legitimate political demands, legitimate democratic aspirations of their own people. So if you see the politics, the political economy of the three regimes, they are undemocratic, they are dependent on the godfathers of Arab and foreign sponsors. They don't care about the sovereignty of their own country, both in its external dimension and internal in terms of the self-determination and democratic aspiration of their own people. So they share this common character. And in any political circumstance, leaders with similar political understanding or aspiration or demand, and in this case a very dictatorial and authoritarian demand, naturally would form an alliance. So the alliance we see in the Horn between Abiy, Isaias and Formaggio is, I would prefer to call it a triangle of evil. It's a club of dictators. It's an alliance between dictators, an alliance to crush a democratic aspiration of their own people. This is the inherent nature of the relationships. So their relationship emanates from the very nature of their politics, from the very nature of their political and subsequent economic demands. Now, when we come specifically to the genocidal alliance between the three dictators, we would find the answer in the background or in the character of the regimes, as we have tried to see earlier. I mean, the survival of the regime in Addis or Asmara or Formaggio somehow depends on the survival of one. I mean, for Isaias to survive, it seems that Abiy's existence is quite essential. And against, they consider that their authoritarian aspiration, their centralizing aspiration, their aspiration or their demand to crush any quest for self-determination, they consider the Tigrayan force, the Tigrayan political force, and the people of Tigray as obstacle to their undemocratic political project. If we have to find a good nomenclature, a good name for the project they are trying to implement, it's like the Eritreization of the region, the Horn, because they don't want any conditional implement or conditional form of check and balance to hold their authoritarian demands. So the reason why they are allying against Tigray is because they consider Tigray and its political force, its people, its political principles, the conditionality or the demand for conditional governance, the demand for regional autonomy, the demand not only for regional autonomy, but the demand for the sovereign existence, the demand for self-determination is considered by Isaias, Abiy and Formaggio as a natural block, a natural impediment towards their dictatorial ambition. So their relationship depends and emanates from this undemocratic desire to crush the democratic aspirations of the people of Tigray.
Tigray External Affairs Office issued a press statement earlier today saying Eritrean troops, leadership of the Afar region, as well as Amhara expansionists are instigating repeated provocative against Tigrayan forces. The statement read that despite commitment on the side of Tigrayan forces to a peaceful resolution of the conflict, Afar region forces had made repeated incursions into Tigrayan's territories. The statement read that despite Tigray's army maintaining the full spectrum of its capabilities, had not taken any countermeasures beyond repelling repeated attacks on Tigray's positions less than 30 kilometers from Maqala for over 6 weeks, mainly in order to give peace a chance and avoid the trap set up by the adversaries to create enduring animosity between the people of Tigray and Afar. According to the statement, of the repeated attacks have been supported by heavily armed entity organized under the guise of Red Sea Afar Force with direct leadership from the Eritrean government. The statement said that the attacks were launched with the deliberate intention of obstructing humanitarian aid intended to reach Tigray. The statement reads that the measures taken in response to the provocation were principally designed to neutralize Eritrean mercenaries in such a way that they will no longer pose a threat to the brotherly relations between the peoples of Afar and Tigray. Lastly, the statement conveyed that Tigray's army does not wish to see the conflict deteriorate further and made a call to the Afar people to dissuade forces in the region from exasperating the conflict. The statement also made a full call to the international community to ramp up humanitarian assistance to the people of Tigray and Afar, and ensured that the government will extend all necessary cooperations to make these endeavors a success.